say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our first as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of First Time for Everything. We're glad to have you back. And tonight we are welcoming AJ Mullican, and she's going to introduce a little bit about herself. She's written over 30 books, I think she said. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about your genre, who you are, and anything else you'd like us to know?
Well, I mostly write romance, generally paranormal, but I do write contemporary, sci-fi, fantasy. I kind of throw it all in there. I have written some horror shorts and a horror novella, but mostly it's all the romance.
Nice. So let's kind of jump into like your history with writing and where you got started and talk about like when you first knew you wanted to be a writer and kind of how you went through that process to write your first and maybe publish your first book.
I started out writing poetry and short stories in high school and then later on in college. It was my way of processing things and dealing with emotions and things like that. But I got to a point where I was writing a bunch of little flash fiction kind of things about this female serial killer from birth all the way through till death and eventual execution. And I thought, well, it'd be kind of cool to turn it into a book. I didn't know how it would begin at first. So I just kind of started the story out and it kind of evolved as I went. I'm a discovery writer, and so I tend to just not really plan things out too terrible much. I mostly just kind of go out through my pants and see what happens. There's a character in this book, like my first book, Whispers of Death, that totally surprised me coming in near the end to save the day. I was like, what's he doing there? And I was kind of like, well, I guess we'll just go with it and see what happens.
That's really cool. So how old were you when you put out your first book?
I was about 36. So I'm 45 now. It's almost 9 years ago this month. So
nice. So you've done like 30 books in 9 years. That's impressive for sure.
More like in the last since 2018. Because
okay. Yeah.
It's been more as we get closer, more and more chunking together. I've got my little shelf behind me of a lot of my published books. Not all of them, but a good deal of them up here. So
that's really cool. So because you've written so much in such a short period of time, talk a little bit about like what your process is to like an idea, from forming an idea to publishing a book. What is that process like for you?
It can vary anywhere from a single word or phrase or concept that drives a story to an image that I see, like a cover image or something like that would make a great story, and then kind of snowballs from there. The second book I wrote was a start of a series, a sci-fi dystopian. So I went from paranormal / supernatural thriller to sci-fi dystopian, kind of jumping around a little bit with genres and stuff until I found my home in romance. And it was just kind of just the concept of what the word abnormal and what might that be taken to mean in the future. Like what if abnormalities were kind of like superpowers were kind of a thing that everybody has, but if you're in the upper class, it's not considered abnormal. It's considered, it's a gift, it's power, and in the lower class, no, it's abnormal, got to get rid of it, and how that might work, politically and socially and things like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think along those lines a lot too. So I love that. Taking it beyond kind of the surface value of I have a superpower, but getting into more of that social dynamic of what does that mean for each individual person. So that's really cool. So kind of talking back to when you got started, and if you were able to kind of go back and change anything or talk to your younger self and say, hey, this time do it this way. Would there be any like advice you would give yourself when you were kind of starting out doing this?
Oh, absolutely. Don't paint your own cover. The cover that it has for the graphic here today is not the original cover, and I don't have the image anymore. I don't think, because I gave all the books that had that cover away or sold them. But it was the original cover I had was terrible. I didn't know anything about marketing aside from telling friends and family, "Ooh, I wrote a book." Um, there's so much I've learned that it probably would do better if I re-released it now. I've taken it off because it doesn't fit with my brand anymore. It's very dark and not at all romantic. There is a romance on the side, but it's not a romance novel. And so it doesn't really fit with what I write right now. So I kind of took it down for a while until I think of what I want to do with it later on in the future. Maybe if I want to bring it back, or if I want to, I just kind of shelved it for now.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think a lot of people are afraid to do that with earlier work. They're afraid to say, okay, let me take this down or get rid of it for a little bit because, they did put the work into it and the mindset. I have a book that I took out in my 30s and it's no longer a publication and I'm at the same place. I'm like, is this something I want to re-release? Is it something that had its time and I'm done with it? And I haven't made that decision yet. So same thing. It's been shelved now for some years and, and I'm okay with that because I know where I'm going moving forward and I'm not 100% sure that book will make sense. So I think that's really a strength in writers because I think young writers, especially or newer writers are afraid kind of to scrap anything, whether they're afraid to scrap something within the book or the book itself. And do you find that like when you're writing and you're going back and editing, are you comfortable with like scrapping parts or rewriting parts?
Killing the darlings.
Yeah.
Killing the darlings. Yeah. My first drafts are largely really close to what the final draft is because I write as I want it read. I may take out a chapter here and there, rearrange some things here and there, but for the most part, I started chapter 1, page 1, and just plow through until I get to the end, and then I go through and clean up and do things like that. But I'm very OCD about it, so like I write it how I want to see it written. I don't even like writing on my phone and not being able to tab. Like I want it formatted almost how it's going to be at the end, except double space. My editor can like see better to read it through and everything. But so it's like a weird combination of my OCD and my like neurodivergent self. It's like I've got to write it the way it's supposed to be. I can't skip around. People say, "Oh, if you're having trouble with this chapter, just write a later chapter and come back to it." I'm like, "What?"
Yeah, that's
how.
Totally relatable. I'm an A to Z. Like I literally write A to Z, and I do like I'll pause. Same thing if I'm like I got to think about this. I'm a pantser too. Though, so like I sit down and I don't always know. But I really have this ability to let things simmer so that when I do sit down, it's ready to be cooked. I guess that's the best way I can put it. So, and everybody's different, and that's one thing within writing. I think it's good to know is what your strengths are, not to get caught up by somebody else's style. Because you'll be a better writer if you know your voice, and that sounds like you definitely do. But let's talk a little bit about your branding. So, you came into this and you wrote this first book, and then you've kind of gravitated towards more like romance. How do you build your brand? How do you really get your brand out there in a way that you feel like you're reaching the readers you need to reach?
I do a lot of promo on Facebook. I can't really afford like the ads and things like that. So I do a lot of promo on Facebook. People say, "Oh, I'm looking for books with XYZ tropes," and I'm like, "Hey, I've got this." And or I go to open promo posts and post on those, do Facebook parties where there's a release party for somebody's book, and I post, here's a few things about me, here's a little game, here's where you can find me, blah blah blah, and boom, it's very organic. It's not like the fastest growing method, but it does. There's people out there who occasionally actually recommend myself. I'm like, oh, hey, cool, that's someone who read my thing. That's awesome,
For sure, for sure. And so I know you said you did your original cover. Are you an indie, like self-published author? Are you hybrid? Where do you fall kind of in that
I'm
area?
primarily indie. I was through a publisher with Abnormal for a while. That publisher fell through. Abnormal series, which had 3 books and a couple novellas out. I've pulled that as well because the dystopian doesn't really fit what I'm doing right now either. It did have some romance in it, but it wasn't quite fitting and it wasn't quite jiving with what I'm doing right now. So that's another thing that's kind of shelved and like may come back to it later, finish the series later because I did have another 2 books planned. But right now it's pretty much indie with some occasional anthologies that I jump in, with other people who are publishing, and then it's mostly just me. It's partly the Leo control freak, like I've got to I can't stand the waiting to find out what's my cover going to be, when's my release date, what's all this. I can set the things, I know what they are. I like having my hands in everything.
Yeah, I do too. I kind of have a similar path in that I was going more like traditional at one point, had some contracts and got frustrated with those, and eventually did go indie on my own. And now I'm helping some other authors. Part of it was creative control, being able to say, I want this cover, I want it to come out at this time, I don't want to wait for an email type of thing. But like, let's talk about the flip side of that. So having kind of that knowledge base, having worked with other publishers and doing it indie now, what are some of the cons and things that you find you definitely are having to put a lot more work into doing this yourself?
It definitely is a lot of work. Sourcing everything yourself, paying for everything yourself, doing all the work yourself. I have a PA who helps me out with organizing some things here and there, and with my Facebook group, and with reminding me of these parties that I signed up to do, and like, oh yeah, that's right, I did 2 of them, I need to schedule those real quick. Yeah. So you got to make use of the resources that there are out to help. There's PAs, there's other authors you can network with and talk with and say, hey, can I bounce my ideas off of you? What works for you as far as, you write, say you write the same subgenre that I'm writing. Well, how does it working for you? What's working for you? Or just, kind of, the sourcing of it was interesting. And what I learned briefly from when I worked with a publisher, I learned some things that work better than others. I learned maybe to listen to advice from editors and such, because you always think you know best until somebody's like, you really should lean it this way. And they're like, no, I want it this way. It's so it is a little bit of humility getting that control taken away, not taken away, but giving up that control so someone else can say this could be better if you do it this way instead. So it's a lot of balancing. I just prefer indie for me. I did learn a lot through the publisher. I'm still friends with the publisher. The woman who ran the publishing company that I was with briefly, still friends with her online, still follow her and, chat with her occasionally, but it's just a matter of, I prefer to do it myself, my way. And it may not be the best way, but it works for me.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned PAs, and that's something I think, I think I've really seen a surge lately of authors using PAs. So if people don't know what that is, can you tell them what a PA is and how you went about getting one?
Personal assistant or professional assistant, but basically PAs, depending on the contract you have with the PA, what kind of things you're willing to outsource or to delegate. They help with organizing things, formatting, setting up parties, helping you with the marketing, helping you keep your head in the game. Like you should not be on Facebook right now. Why are you not writing? You have the deadline. Blah blah blah. And there's just moral support too. There's a lot of PAs out on. I'm mostly on Facebook. That's why I keep mentioning it. like terrible with TikTok and the Instagram and all those. Like I'm horrible with it. I am not the TikTok generation at all. And
Yeah, me either.
yeah, like I said, I'm 45. I don't. I can make a few videos here and there, but I don't know what I'm doing with TikTok at all. Um, yeah, they just help you, get the word out. They can help with graphics. If you're not good at making your own graphics, they can like, tool around and do that, or tell you who might be able to. Um, so it's really good. My PA, her name's Sarah Klinger. She is amazing. She's such a great friend and just so good to work with. Um, and and there's other sources. There's editors. Finding good editors always good. My mom happens to edit my books, which people think is hilarious because I write some pretty
Right,
steamy
yeah.
stuff and pretty weird steamy stuff sometimes. And she just kind of rolls with it. She's like, you know what?
Yeah.
But there's a difference between editing something and like, oh, my daughter's into this. It's like, no, I'm just writing tropes to
Right.
fit with what I'm doing. It doesn't necessarily mean I'm into tentacles or anything.
Yeah.
Following the tropes.
That's awesome though that your mom is able to do that for you, because I mean that is, editing is one of those things that I think a lot of people shortcut on because of the expense of it. And it is something that you can't shortcut on, because it is like what the thing that, no matter how great the story is, if you have bad editing, it's going to just be discarded by people because they're like, you didn't put the work into it. And I think that's the thing about being indie, is that, being aware of what you are able to do yourself and what you have to outsource for.
Right.
And the PA that's why I wanted you to mention that too, is because I think the PA is something that a lot of authors haven't even really thought about. Because it is an asset if you are working or if you're busy writing or whatever it is, to have somebody that is able to take that time to kind of represent you in groups or online. Now, how did you meet your PA?
I was kind of kidnapped.
Oh.
It was a strange story because like I had heard of her and kind of had been Facebook friends with her for a little bit anyway. Facebook friends with tons of PAs that I don't actually work with. But I was just chatting with one of her clients, and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden it was like I'm pulled into a group chat, and it's like, you're mine now. Okay. I was like, oh, okay. But I mean, there's also PAs, they'll post on Facebook saying, hey, I've got openings for clients for X, Y, and Z. These are my plans. These are whatever. And it just depends on how you end up finding them. Sometimes it's kismet. Sometimes it's, searching for the right one. Sometimes you kind of bounce around from one PA to another until you find someone you jive with. Not necessarily anything wrong with any of the other PAs, it's just sometimes you got to find that person you click with to be able to really work well together.
Yeah, for sure. Now, because social media is so full of scammers and people that try to get into your inbox and sell you things, does your PA or do the PAs you've worked with have certain credentials that you looked for, or was it really just word of mouth and reference for you?
Word of mouth for me and references, definitely. But sometimes some PAs, have, I don't know if there's any credentials they really need, but some PAs have more experience than others. My PA works really well, and she's got some really successful clients, and it just depends on, I guess, also what you're looking for in a PA. How much are you willing to delegate? Oh, sorry, I'm not moving enough.
Oh yeah, sensor.
The sensor. Sensor. It was like nobody's here. But yeah. So but yeah, it's just a bunch of that kind of thing. Finding the right combination of personalities and things. I mean, I've got a friend who's an author who her PA doesn't do a whole lot for her that I see like on the public side. But that doesn't mean she's not working in the background doing other
Right.
things that are helpful and assistant. So there's different things that the different PAs do. Some PAs are very very much in your face, vocal about it. Like you'll see them posting their authors' works on the promo posts and everything. I like to do it myself because I'm a little weird, but it just depends. And it's great to be able to find someone you can work with and kind of share in the journey with,
Yeah.
and who will help you out and be there for you and kind of sit there when you're having imposter syndrome and say you are not
Yes.
terrible. Stop it.
For sure. And I appreciate you talking about that, because I think it's one of the things we haven't talked about on the show, nor have I really heard people talk about it, was using PAs and the benefits of them. And I think it's important for authors to kind of look at those different things, because we get really bombarded with, you think, marketing. People are like, I'll do this, I'll do that. I'll review your book for money. And before long, you just shut everything down because you're like, stop talking to me, like, altogether. So I think it's really important for authors who've been successful using certain marketing tools, like using a PA, to really be vocal about it, so that other authors can be like, okay, so that is legitimate. Like, that is something that may benefit me, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about,
Oh,
your
absolutely.
experience as well. Let's go back in time a little bit. So let's talk about when you put your first book out. And one of my favorite questions, because it's an awkward one, is reviews. So, like, the first time you got a negative review, if you ever got one, maybe you're all 5 stars, who knows? The first time you get a negative review, how did you react, and what did you really take from that experience?
The first negative review I really got was on Abnormal, actually. And it was this really bizarre negative review, because the gentleman spent like so many paragraphs talking about how derivative it is and how blah 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 and this and that and this and that. I don't have the exact words right now, but like paragraphs just kind of tearing into it. And then at the end, it's like, now I don't want to say that I didn't like the book. I really did enjoy it. And it's like, and the last paragraph is like, I'm like, what is this? Like, you're tearing it to pieces for paragraphs, and then you just go in like, but I really liked it. Why then?
Why?
So I try not to look too much at the negative reviews. I am terrified of going to Goodreads, because I have heard that they are like vultures there, and will just rip you to shreds if you the kind of person who takes it personally. So I'll look and see how many reviews a book has, if there's any new reviews that have come out, if it's got, if my stars are going up or down or staying stable, what that kind of is going through on Amazon at least. But it's kind of hard, because I am the type who will take it personally, and if the review just sounds like it's ridiculous, and like the person didn't even read the book, or like that wasn't their type of book to begin with, and they read it anyway, and then they didn't like it, well, surprise, this is the type of book you like.
Right.
So if you don't like the tropes, if you don't like the romantic pairings, if you don't like the subgenre, don't read it. I'd rather you not read my book than, like, you like contemporary romance. You read my paranormal romance and you hated it. Well,
Right.
like that kind of thing. So some of them you take with a grain of salt. Some of them, like, that say the writing's terrible or whatever. It's hard to stomach those reviews sometimes. So yeah, I take the ones that are obviously a little kooky, or a little, misguided maybe, with a grain of salt. But some of them, they do kind of hit home a little hard, and you're kind of like, ugh, oh, right there, right there. Let's
Yeah.
just a little bit there, and so but good reviews are nice to see. So you got to take the bad with the good. You're not nobody is gonna have all 5-star reviews all the time.
It'd be weird if they did. I would just say that.
Well,
To me, if somebody had 100 5-star reviews, like, he had to have paid for that. There's just
right,
something
right.
about that wouldn't seem legitimate to me.
And I saw, there's a meme floating around that I've seen that says, like, there's somebody who gave Stonehenge a 1-star review for having not enough rocks. So you've really got to look at it like I said, with a grain of salt. Like, okay, so they didn't like this portion of it, or maybe they didn't like this aspect of it, but that doesn't mean that you yourself are a bad author.
Yeah.
It just means that that person, that reader, didn't jive with your work.
Sure. And I think that's important to note too, for especially new writers who kind of are going into it and can really take it personally, is that, there's no book out there that has all good reviews. I mean, some of the most phenomenal books out there, you go and look at the reviews and they're getting pretty slayed. Like it's not good, So I think you have to recognize that you eventually find your readers. And it may take a while, and you may go through some brutality at that time of people that don't like your stuff, and that's okay. I mean, you can go to any product on Amazon, anything, and you're always going to have negative reviews, no matter what. I mean, I do, because I'll be like, I want to buy something, and I'm like, okay, let me look at the 1 stars too. And then I'm always like, should I buy it? And then I'm like, no, you have to remember, like, a certain percentage is always going to be negative. But reviews can always be really beneficial if somebody's confused by something, or maybe you need a little extra editing or things like that. I think it is important to be aware of legitimate reviews where someone's saying, hey, I enjoyed this, but I was a little confused by this, or the person's name was Sam in this chapter and then Sandy in another chapter. Obviously, these are things we need to pay attention to. But I saw a review on Amazon where someone didn't like something Amazon did, and so they gave the book a bad review. It was never about the book; it was about packaging from Amazon, but they gave it a 1 star. So, like, you have to really take it with a grain of salt and move forward. But I think, yeah, and I'm not a huge review reader either. I do the same thing. I kind of do a quick scan, make sure that nothing's really out of whack that I need to pay attention to. But if you get buried in that, then you end up being depressed for really no reason. Because again, there's no book out there that's loved by everyone. No song, no piece of art, nothing.
Absolutely subjective.
Exactly. And there are people that pick up your stuff and it's not their genre. I mean, I have a horror book, and I had someone that gave me a kind of a mediocre review, and he's like, but then again, I don't really like horror. And I thought, then why did you read it? But he still made the review, and you still got to move on. So I think that's really good advice. But kind of going with the negative, I really believe, and I mentioned this even in the intro, which is, we learn as much from mistakes. We learn as much from kind of like negative first, or things that fail, as we do from when we're successful. Do you have any kind of particular things you can look back on and say, yeah, I failed at that, but it did teach me this, and it made me better at, A, B, or C?
Oh yeah, I have a series of books called My Nowhere World, which is a fictional town I made up in North Carolina, called Nowhere, and the first 3 books are a trilogy. Then the next 3 books are another trilogy, but continuing from where the first 3 left off. And I didn't make that clear in the blurbs, and someone in like the first book was like, well, this is confusing because I jumped right in, I didn't know, and so that was a review that was like,
Sure.
Oh, so I had to go back and kind of edit all my blurbs and kind of, I've done the A+ thing on Amazon, where you kind of connect your series together and you say, okay, these books all are part of this. Here's the reading order, and I try to, when I'm talking about the books, mention, okay, this book can be read alone, but it is part of an established world. So be aware there's cameos and mentions of things that happened in the past in the world, etc. And so I try to put those caveats in so that when people are reading it, they're not kind of thrown off by that. And so that's something that was a negative that I learned from, and I kind of try to adjust how I present things from that.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I was thinking when you're saying that is, like for me, I write a lot of, I'm cross genre, so I get into like a lot of different things, anything from contemporary suspense all the way to horror, some romance there. But because of that, I had some people were like, well, I wish I had known this had this in it, whatever it was. So I did make little cards with kind of like triggers, like maybe things people needed to know about sexual assault, things like that if they're in the book. What is your feeling on trigger warnings and being vocal about them as an author?
I do have a trigger warnings page on my website, ajmullican.com/triggers, lists general trigger warning graphic, and then beneath it, each book has a list of the triggers that may be in the book, so if you want a general idea, you can, Lord have mercy, this I mean, I can just manually turn it on, but that's annoying. But general trigger warnings, like this may be in my books, it may not be. You may want, if you want spoilers, read further down for the specific trigger warnings. I am not triggered by much personally at all when I'm reading, so I find it very difficult to locate the triggers that my readers might have, because I don't have that in me. When I'm reading, I don't get triggered by the death of a character, or essay, or sexual assault, things like that. So the fan turned off too. That's fun. I'm in Arizona. I need the fan. And so I'm learning what are some of the common triggers and what ones need to be listed. Like it seems so strange to me. I don't have kids or anything, never had kids, never been pregnant, but pregnancy can be a trigger for some people.
Yeah.
Infertility can be a trigger for some people. And sometimes it's like the same person can be triggered by both. And that really confuses me. I don't understand that. But I try to list what it can be. And once I learn that XYZ is a potential trigger for some readers, then I try to add it to my list and say, okay, this needs to be something I need to mention, because some people don't want to be reading along and all of a sudden, bam, like, hit with it. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because when I did my cards, I went to one of the, groups of readers I was on, and I was trying to really kind of, same like that, determine what were triggers, what were things I should mention. And so I asked, it was a can of worms. Like I literally had to just then go with the majority of what people said, because everything is a trigger to someone. That's what I realized by asking that question. Is it got to the point where I was like, I would just have to list the whole story, word for word, So then what I did was I took percentages. Okay, this percentage of people are triggered by this. And so I did the main triggers when I was doing that. But like if somebody comes up and talks to me, sometimes I'll kind of try to feel that out too. Like they'll say, oh, does this have this in it? Or, and then I'll kind of just try to feel out what does or doesn't and go from there. But it's a touchy subject. I know there's authors who don't want to use trigger warnings because they're afraid it'll spoil the story, the twists or whatever that's in there. And the ones that are pretty, vehemently opposed to using that, where, for me, I still use triggers in a way or trigger warnings in a way that I'm still not giving away the story, but I'm giving away something that might genuinely cause somebody suffering. And I don't want to do that. I want them to enjoy reading my book and not be miserable because they read it. So yeah, it's definitely a touchy subject.
It is, but but then conversely, you have readers who use trigger warnings as a shopping list.
That is true.
I love these triggers. I want to read all of them. And it's like, okay, so you're not triggered by it. You like the triggers.
Right.
And so now your trigger warnings are your tropes.
That's interesting because it's true. Because I've had people come up and they look at their cards and they go, "Oh, that sounds really good," because I put the list
the triggers in it. Like, oh yes, juicy. Yes, all right.
Yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah. So that was my kind of compromise on my website, though. To do that was, I put the little graphic of what the main triggers that can be found across my books are, and then individually listing the books further down. If you don't want to scroll to get spoiled, you don't have to. But if you want to know, you can scroll and read on and find out, like, does this book that sounds interesting, does it have a trigger for me that I don't want to read?
Sure. Yeah. And I think that's fair. I think a lot of readers appreciated that. And the feedback I get is always really positive. Thank you for doing that. Like I said, one way or the other, some aren't bothered by it. They still appreciate that it's there. Some are, they won't purchase them. Like you said, there are the ones that are like, ooh, that makes it sound juicy. And so they want to read it. Very cool. So kind of going back to, did you always know, like, was this something from childhood you knew that you wanted to be a writer, or was this something that eventually developed as you got older?
I'm a little ADD, so I wanted to be everything when I was growing up. Anything that I heard of sounded like a cool job, and I wanted to have all the cool jobs. So yeah, I wrote a little bit here and there, and I wanted to be a writer. But I think it wasn't until I actually got to doing it and writing myself and like getting into the stories and taking all these things that are in my head all the time and like putting them out, like that really brought me into like, well, if this has become like a second job as opposed to like just a little fun little hobby. I mean, I do have a day job that pays the bills, etc. But this is something I really enjoy it. It's fun. It's frustrating at times, but it really keeps me moving and like keeps me motivated to keep going. Yeah, having a bad day. Well, you know what? If I wake up early before work, I can write. Or if I get off work and I'm tired and I don't want to write, I can scroll Facebook and find somebody asking for something similar to what I've written and pop a little recommendation in there and move on. Yeah, it just depends, but it's something that more than not brings me joy to do it and to have that as part of my life.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, I think, for me, I'm kind of like you. I was that child that wanted to do whatever the last thing I saw pretty much in TV was. I wanted to be a jockey at one point. I wanted to be a truck driver. It was just like whatever movie I saw, I'm like, I want to do that.
Astronaut, teacher, all the.
Yeah,
I would not make a good astronaut. I'm terrible.
Yeah, no, I would be a pilot at one point. I don't even like riding in planes. I don't know why I thought I wanted to fly one. But it's interesting because I went through that. I mean, I always enjoyed writing and I liked art when I was a kid, but like definitely went through so many different aspects. And it wasn't until I really hit a certain age where I thought, oh, I think I really want to do this. Like, I think this is something I want to pursue. And then I went to school for journalism and then that didn't work out. So I decided I couldn't be neutral. So I'm not a good neutral person. I have an opinion about everything. So really, you basically hit it more a little bit older when you were like, okay, I want to do this. Then when you were writing poetry in high school, did you think that you would eventually do this, or was that just something you were doing at that time to kind of express yourself?
That was more expression and dealing with emotions and dealing with just life in general. I am bipolar, so like dealing with it was mostly the depression is when I would write the most deep stuff. When I was manic, I'd write just ridiculous stuff. Who knows what comes out of my head when I'm manic, but in the depressive episodes, you write. I wrote a lot deeper stuff, and eventually I got to where I wasn't really needing to process my emotions through the poetry, but I still enjoyed making stories. And that's where I kind of shifted from the poetry to the narrative, because I found that I really enjoyed creating worlds, creating characters. Maybe I'll throw some of my trauma into one of the characters here and there, and process it that way, but not really so much. I mean, a lot of my characters have been through a lot of stuff that's way worse than anything I've been through.
Yeah.
But, because it's all just whatever's in my head that comes out.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that, because today at work I was literally talking to my coworkers and we were talking about therapy, and I said, well, yeah, I didn't do therapy. I just make my characters go through stuff, and I either make them have a better outcome or I just work through the outcome, through it mentally while they're going through it. I'm working through it myself, or I just create the outcome I wish I would have had. But yeah, and it actually is really therapeutic. And I will say that for anybody, even if they're not trying to write a book, is like, it is really therapeutic to take something fictionally and work through some of your dealings, trauma, issues, whatever it is, because it does allow you to have a little more control. Like, you get to play God when you went through it. So that for me, I found to be, really, really therapeutic. Yeah. I definitely put my characters through more too, as well. Like they're
right. My characters are probably like, what the heck, man?
Why? It's like, I don't know if you see the meme that goes around, which shows everybody, like, it says, when I don't kill my characters, and it shows them all like laughing and hugging and, at the end of it. But like, that's true. I don't think I've ever had a book where I didn't kill off a character.
Yeah.
I kind of enjoy it. Even if it makes me cry, I kind of enjoy it. Now, here's a fun question. So when you're writing characters and you do have to do something, like put them through something or kill them off, how attached are you? Like, do you cry? Do you go through an emotional response when you have to put your characters through something?
I don't generally, but also I'm that kid that my mom always said I had no soul because I don't cry at movies.
Okay.
I don't cry at fictional stuff very often. The first time I ever cried at a movie was when Groot died in Guardians of the Galaxy, when Rocket was so sad. I sobbed in the theater. My husband was like, "Who is this?" Because I was like, "Oh," but I don't have that reaction to fiction generally. So when I'm writing my own characters through that, I don't generally have that either, because it's like, well, that's just not how my brain is wired to react to fiction. And sorry, the cat is rubbing against the monitor. Yes, buddy, I know I love you, dude.
Cats are allowed. They can do what they want.
Right? He's been on Go Indie Now a bunch of times already anyway.
Oh yeah, it was like, I was in Go Indie Now last Sunday, and Tiffany Vega's dog's head was just like in the screen the whole time. It was so cute.
Yep.
Yeah. We're all animal lovers here, so
Yeah.
That's the thing. So, all right. So tell me what you're working on now and kind of where you're moving going forward.
Right now, I'm working on a prequel to Call Me Bunny. Call Me Bunny is a contemporary reverse harem or wide choose, depending on the terminology you use. Um, it's a darker book, but it's got a lot of humor to it too. And I'm working on the prequel to it right now because my PA kept calling it Bad Bunny because she couldn't get the title right. She's like, "Well, now you need to write Bad Bunny because you know
That's
you
funny.
got Call Me Bunny out. You need to write Bad Bunny." I'm like, "I wrapped everything up in Call Me Bunny." She's like, "Well, write the prequel or something." But so I'm working on that right now, and it's a lot of fun. And I'm also working on a co-write another nowhere book. This one is a sapphic paranormal romance with two demons, or one's a half demon, one's a full demon, who get together and they got to go through some stuff in the process of their romance and everything. So I kind of juggle a few different stories at once, so I've got a couple things going on at any time, but it keeps me busy.
Yeah, for sure. So in any given year, how much do you put out?
Usually about, I'd say 8 to 10 books a year, maybe more, maybe less. It just depends on the mood I'm in. And it could be novellas, it could be full-length novels, It just depends on what the muse is up to, I try not to overload myself. I have had years where I've had to take down pre-orders because I'm like, okay, I've put way too much on my plate, need to dial it back a little bit. Um, so I try to balance that. The more I do this, the more I learn how much I can handle. I am proud every year when I do like a little annual wrap up where I take all the things I published, put a little pretty graphic together and say this is what I did for 20 whatever.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool to go from putting out one book in 2015, another in 2018, and then another and then all of a sudden like two or three in 2020, and then it kind of snowballs from there. And it's kind of cool to see the progression and see that as I learn as I go, I'm getting quicker at it. I'm getting better at it to where there's less for my mom to fix when she runs through it.
Nice.
It's just it's cool to see the progression of Whispers of Death. The first novel I put out, it had like so many different iterations and processes, and I stopped and started and had a bunch of author friends on Facebook. We had this little writing group. We would share chapters back and forth and make suggestions and comments and everything. And I've gone from that to just A to B to Z to get this one done, out, boom, here you go, next, out, boom, here you go. And it's like it's a continual system as opposed to a very chaotic kind of mass of what am I doing.
Yeah, yeah. And how would you say that's like impacted your readers? Like when you were putting out, say, one book or two books a year versus now, do you feel like you saw an increase in readership? Do you feel like your readers are kind of chomping at the bit for your next book? How has that impacted that?
Definitely there's been an increase. As I'm learning what tropes and genres and all the combinations of things are more popular, um, I'm finding that some of my books that I'm putting out are more popular from the get-go than they are like picking up that speed as I'm discovered, I guess. I don't know, as readers hear about me. Um, I find that I'm writing more to what people want to read. Not to say that books I've written in the past, Pact with the Pack, my first Nowhere book was in 2020, and that one still is a solid, as far as Kindle Unlimited reads and stuff like that. It's a solid runner. Call Me Bunny though is just like bam, like up there, because dark romance is like the thing now. Everyone wants something dark, and Call Me Bunny is fun on top of that. So hopefully they enjoy,
Yeah, yeah.
So
And you write series. Do you also write standalones?
yes, I do. I do occasionally
And what
write
do you feel
standalones.
like does better, your series or your standalones?
The series tend to do better. the tricky thing with series, people want, in large part, readers want them done before they'll dive into them.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, Nowhere is like an ongoing series because I keep adding standalones to the world, so technically they're standalones, but they're also the series that's continuing the story of the world. Eventually I'm sure I'll slow down with Nowhere and, be done with that. And then, work more towards standalones or shorter series. I have a sci-fi romance, alien romance series. It's just 3 books. It's done. But it's just a matter of finding the balance and finding what works for you. Like Call Me Bunny was supposed to be a standalone and ended up not being. It's going to be a duet by the time I get the prequel finished, which is I'm more than halfway there, so that's good. But it's all subjective, and it's all just dependent on the genre too. People might more gravitate towards standalone contemporary, but paranormal, they might want more of a series. So it's like, well, what am I writing? What am I going for? So it depends on the story too, because sometimes the story, you get to the end and it's like, oh no, there's more, but wait, there's more.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting when readers kind of give you, maybe you think you're done, and then the readers kind of give you feedback and say, you're going to write another one, right? I just had that with my newest book, where the first question when a beta reader said is, you're going to have another one, right? And I was like, well, I wasn't necessarily planning on it, but it wasn't not planning on it,
Right.
So I think that feedback can definitely kind of drive that as well, when you think you're done but you're not. But it's interesting what you said about series, because I was at an event and I saw other books too for the publishing company, and I have one of the writers, he has the first in his series, and a lady looked at it and she goes, oh, I see it's a series, and she's like, are the other ones out yet? And I was like, well, not yet, he's working. And she's like, well, I just don't want to buy it until like they're all out. And I was like, that could be years, you never know. I mean
depending on the author. I mean, like George R.R. Martin's been working on Winds of Winter for how long now?
Right.
Like at least I'm putting the books out, eventually you'll get
So it is interesting, really adapting to your readers as much as they adapt to us. Like they find us, but you're right. And there are certain genres I feel like they kind of need to have that series. They really, really want that. And I think that anything with romance or fantasy tends to be like, I want a series, like they want a series out of it so they can continue to read on for those stories. And I always feel bad. Like I think of authors, I know they're just like, they're sick of writing it. I always think of like Misery, and they're sick of writing this character, but like the reader's like, we want another one. And they're like, oh, really?
Yeah.
But hey,
then Kathy Bates comes along with a mallet, and
you better do it. That's right. All right. Well, we're going to do the wheel. Let's see. Let me share real quick, and then we'll do that. So let me pull this up. Let me know if you can see the wheel.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's give it a spin. Ooh. All right. First failure. And that can be anything. It's not necessarily related to writing. It could be, it could be just in life, something you were really trying at and was your first failure.
Let me think. Not that I've never had failures. It's just there's so many. I have to think of which one's the first one, Oh, man. And there's so many ways to interpret that too. I guess I'll go along with the writing. There was a book, a novella that I wrote for an anthology. It has since disappeared into the ether because it was a failure. It was, my voice wasn't really there. I didn't, once the story was done, I was like, oh, this was cool. And I was like, no, it's really not. I intended to make it into a series of novellas and continue on, and I just dropped it. When the anthology, when the rights reverted, I just kind of stuffed it under the covers and, like back in the corner and kind of, So.
Is it something you think you would ever revisit, or you think it's just done?
I think it was an ill concept to begin with. I had an idea, and it was probably one of those manic, this is a great idea kind of things, and it wasn't really fully cooked.
Yeah.
And I'm better at gauging which ideas are the ones that will pan out and which won't now, than I was. I mean, I still have things I think that this is really cool, and then the readers are like, you
Yeah.
know, so it still depends. And readers can be fickle sometimes. You get the ones who are like, I'm going to buy everything they ever write ever and read it and love it. And then you get the ones who are like, well, I didn't like the what you put out yesterday, so I'm never reading anything you write again.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, it's definitely very fickle. And I think over the years, interesting having, self-published back in the mid 2000s. And then now I've seen that fickleness grow because of social media, because of, I don't know if Goodreads was even out back then, but like, I didn't know about it. Like having that platform, you definitely are starting to see a lot more like, I don't know if it's particularness or people just finally feel like they have a voice on this or what it is, but yeah, there's definitely like, you definitely have people that will only read certain genres. And if you write like I do, and it sounds like you have as well, where you're writing across genres, I had someone that was offended because the book I wrote wasn't horror, but I mean, I never said it was. It was just a book I wrote, it had horror elements, but it wasn't horror. And they got upset that it wasn't horror. And I'm like, I never said it was horror. It literally says that it's visionary fiction, So it's an interesting thing as a writer, especially if you're not really like locked into one genre, is really kind of finding your people that are happy with your voice versus say specific things that you write as well. Well, I would say my first failure, it's kind of a funny one. I can sing if I am not around anyone, but I cannot sing because I get really nervous in person. And when I was in school, I really wanted to sing. So I joined choir and I got in there and I was really nervous and I was trying to sing and I saw everybody kind of like looking at me and I realized I sounded terrible, so that was my first failure. And I still sing. I sing to my children and I sing at home, but I never sing in public because of that. It wasn't a good experience.
I always say I'm tone incapable, not tone deaf. I am fully aware of how off key I am. I just still like to sing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's do another spin of this wheel. Let's see, present. Oh, it seems like a fair one to land on after first failure is first success.
Right. There you go. Yeah, I would say, keeping with the writing theme, my first success probably was Packed with the Pact. With the Pack. I can't even say the title. I made it a tongue twister. Because it's still going strong. It was nominated for a Reverse Hammer Award the year it came out. It still gets great reviews. It's got the most reviews of any book I have. So I think that was my first success, and that was written during COVID. I wrote it during a time when I wasn't really working a lot because I quarantine and all that stuff, and but it really motivates me to see the people who still like it, who still enjoy the book, who still read it. It's still getting reads on Kindle Unlimited, even almost 5 years later, 4 years later, whatever. So I would say that would be my first real writing success. Not just putting out a book, not just putting out a published book through a publisher, but putting out something that is still going strong years later. I consider that to be my first success.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I think for me, like kind of going on the thing of being younger is, I always liked writing. And of course, my mother was really supportive, but like mothers are supportive. So like, do we know if we're actually good or not? We don't really know. But I wrote an article in junior high school that I ended up winning an award for. And then it got put in the newspaper. And that's kind of where I started to look at journalism. And I did write nonfiction through my 20s. And like I said, that came to a point where I was like, I don't want to have to be neutral. I want to take a stance on things. And so my logic was then to take real life situations, maybe social issues, and weave them into fiction where I could take a stance, but also, make it more palatable, I guess, for people to want to read. But yeah, so I think that was my first success because it really drove me to think, okay, it's not just my mom who likes my writing. I might actually have something here. So yeah, that was my first one. All right, let's do one more of the wheel. All right.
First recipe.
So first recipe, and this is just anything you've ever made that you know, like, what do you remember the first time that you concocted something and did it?
The closest thing I am not a cook. My husband does the cooking.
Yeah.
The closest thing I've done is when I was, either middle school or teenager-ish. I discovered putting garlic and onion powder on the butter while making a grilled cheese sandwich. It
Ooh,
stinks up the house, but it is so good.
okay,
It's like
yeah.
delicious, and it's like I felt like a chef doing that. Like, oh, I'm mixing stuff up here. I cannot cook. If it comes out of a box, a can, or a bag, I can generally make my way through it. But when it comes to actually like following a recipe, I'm the most like my sister used to love just watch me try to follow a recipe because I have to get ingredient number one first, and then look at the book, and then look at it, and then look, and then measure, and then look back and make sure I measured right, and then put it in, and then get ingredient number two. It is the weirdest process. I cannot just sit there and just throw stuff in and like boom, you got a cake. I can't do that.
That's funny, yeah. So now I was a chef and I was a head baker for a company, so I've definitely done that. But like my first thing was, when I was a teenager, and I was probably like junior high school, so teenager like 13, and I knew I liked sugar and I knew I liked butter, so I put them in a pan. I started cooking them up and I actually made toffee, and I was like, "Oh, this is amazing!" And so like took it to school. My friends were like, "Make some more of that." So I started like making toffee at home and bringing it to school because I like butter and sugar. I still like butter and sugar. I don't eat either of them, but yeah. All right. Well, it was been really great talking to you. So why don't you again tell everybody where they can find your books and anything else you'd like the readers to know?
All right.
I'm sorry, listeners to know.
I'm AJ. You can find my books at ajmullican.com, at Amazon. Search for AJ Mullican. Surprise. I have the one pen name, so everything is under me. Most of my books are all on Amazon because I'm on Kindle Unlimited, so I'm limited to that platform. There's like one or two that are out in the world elsewhere, but mostly you can find me on Amazon. ajmullican.com. ajmullican.com/author has all my social links. You can just click, 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 and follow me over there. And yeah, that's me.
Yeah, very good. That was awesome. And I'll definitely have to check your stuff out. And we really appreciate everybody that has listened in. And please check out AJ at ajmullican.com and anywhere else books are sold, right? Like pretty much anywhere else online. Yeah. So definitely give it a check out. And again, thank you for listening in. Feel free to give us a like or a share. Tell people about the show. Really proud of the show. So, and it was really great talking to you this evening.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Bye, y'all.